there are certain places that you've got to avoid in Portrush. Some of the deep bunkers off the tee you've got to avoid. I can't think that the greens would be specifically very small, but they don't play that big. There's a lot of little shelves that you've got to find, again, guarded by a lot of bunkers and little runoff areas and things like that. So controlling the ball into the greens would be good. And then going back to, to what you talked about, like with a lot of links courses, having that ability to be adaptable and to manage a 7 o'clock in the morning draw where it's cold and windy and you've got to get through to, 10:30 and the sun comes out and the last 5 or 6 holes are pretty benign. So, being able to kind of just hang in there and, embrace the Open Championship for what it is. It's Tom Watson played in 40 and he said he could only have won about 18 of them, but the draw just didn't allow him to get himself in a position. So understanding that that's going to be part of it, and you kind of put your best foot forward and see what you can make of it.
Mr. Parsons, good to see you again.
Nice to see you too, Casey.
Thank you specifically for doing this on your wedding anniversary of all days.
Yes, well, she's teaching yoga, so I was able to kind of slip out there. So it's worked out.
Okay, good. So I'm not in trouble.
No, not yet.
Okay, great. Well, I assume it's a busy time for you outside of the wedding anniversary. You just finished up U.S. Open at Oakmont, and we are preparing to go overseas for the Open Championship. You, of course, born and raised in Northern Ireland. I'm curious about where you grew up. Tell me about your hometown in Northern Ireland and maybe how that shaped you.
Yeah, our nearest neighbour is about 500 yards away from our home. So the town and the village is called Colinchie, which you'll find Colinchie close to Strangford Lough. Really, if you left Belfast and travelled south towards Royal County Down Golf Club, you get about halfway there on the coast, and you'll find this little place called Colinchie. So, it was a great place to grow up, right out in the countryside. Always active, always doing lots of things, lots of sports, and I fell in love with golf in my kind of early teens, and was fortunate enough to go down to Downpatrick Golf Club, which is now called St. Patrick's Golf Club, which is another few miles down the road. You will find Newcastle. But I went to school in Belfast at Campbell College, great school in Belfast. I'm pretty close to Campbell was Knock Golf Club, which is a terrific golf course. Alistair Mackenzie, believe it or not, designed golf course. So when I was good enough to be at school, I was at school, but a lot of the time I was down there hitting balls at Knock, and it was a great place to grow up.
Yeah, and there's about 500 people maybe in Colinchie?
Maybe a little more than that, but certainly we still needed to drive 2 or 3 miles to the nearest store, and so I was quite out there. The little golf course that was close to my father in an oyster farm there for many years, and he grew oysters and supplied them all over the world. And the little golf course there was Mahee Island, and that was really one of my first memories of playing. He would take me from the oyster farm, and we would go off on an old, it was a World War II landing craft that he had, which helped with some of these oyster trestles, and we would travel around this little island, and he would drop me off on the first fairway at Mahee Island Golf Course, which was a beautiful little 9-hole course, gorgeous little thing, but it's since been closed. But great memories of getting dropped off there and playing those 9 holes, paying my green fee, and then continuing to play for summer days. It was cool.
Tell me about Northern Irish oysters. Are they the big ones?
No, they're small little Atlantic oysters. They say they're very, very tasty. And in that in Strangford Lough, they grew a lot of oysters down in that Dundrum Bay area around again close to Newcastle RCD. They would grow a lot of oysters there too. So I recall he was in Tasmania and Hong Kong, and he supplied oysters to, again, like Hong Kong and London through Tesco's and even into Dubai, where I kind of ended up sometime later, which was quite funny.
Yeah. What it's probably a big question, but what does golf really mean to the people of Northern Ireland and maybe Colinchie specifically? Was it something that was accessible, something that everyone could do? Was it something that was culturally important to everyone or a small group?
Yeah, I think it's, I think even since I've been playing, it's changed a little bit. I think golf has become an awful lot more accessible through the years. I wouldn't say Colinchie was a melting pot for golf, certainly, but in and around Belfast and Bangor and Hollywood, where I spent my school life and the beginnings of my professional life, a big golf community. That was always a thing. A lot of people would kind of put their clubs away in September, October as the weather got, fairly average. Hardy people like me, we would have played the Winter League on temporary greens and things like that. But golf is very much part of life for me. An ever bigger growing sort of segment of the Irish and Northern Irish population. And I think as we've seen, Graham McDowell and Clarkey and Padraig Harrington and Rory having such success, I think that's really spurred on a modern generation of young players. At the golf centre that I started teaching at Blackwood, I spoke to my good friend Paul Gray, who runs the facility there now, and I said, how are things going? He said, the place is just slammed. We've had some really good weather. We had 7 weeks of dry weather, which is, kind of certainly sets links courses up for a really good summer. If you get a good spell of dry weather, you're going to get a little bit of run out, and you're going to get some of those nice contrasts on the fairways and into the rough. So, he was saying that things are slammed and pretty exciting, and I'm looking forward to getting over there.
Yeah. At what age do you think did you realize how significant and really truly world class some of the golf courses were up there? I imagine if you grow up by, a Royal County Down, a Portrush or something like that, you might just, you could take it for granted. But at what time did you realize that these were some of the best?
That's a good question. I remember being an assistant at Knock Golf Club, and there was an American gentleman whose name I've forgotten, but upon research, he was very, very wealthy, very successful guy. And he'd come all the way over to play it may have been the British seniors at RCD. And I remember one of the tasks I was given was to take him out at Knock and play golf with him. And he was a good player himself. And we got chatting. And I remember from listening to him just how special he felt being at Royal County Down, being at Portrush, playing golf in Belfast, playing golf in Ireland. It was a big deal for him. And I remember thinking at that point, if this guy who's got access to doing whatever he wants to do is coming over here and feels kind of, somewhat overwhelmed and elated to be here, I thought, it must be a pretty cool experience.
Yeah. I imagine you had aspirations to be a player growing up, but yeah.
Yeah. I was pretty successful in my, let's say, mid to late teens. I took golf up when I was 13 and I ended up, I'm quite obsessive, as you guys have probably seen from the instructional pieces we did. So from 13 to 15, that's all I really did. And I quite quickly got into all of the boys championships and the youths championships. And I was able to have some success in those and play provincially for Ulster and things like that. So, that was certainly on my radar. And I was joking with someone, a couple of days ago that I was teaching, those of us who've made mistakes in life and probably haven't behaved the way we should have behaved, are probably in a better spot to coach people a little bit later on. So I wouldn't say that I was the most.
Why is that?
I just think when you've had a wider traveled life where, I probably should have worked harder in my 20s, and I should have taken better care of my back, and I should have taken better care of myself, and I shouldn't have been so fond of being out late and getting phone numbers of young ladies, then I think I probably would have been better at golf. But, helping, maybe again, a younger generation to realize, look, if this is the direction you want to go, this is probably what's going to happen. If this is a direction you want to go, this is probably what's going to happen. So from a coaching standpoint, I hope that puts me in a position where I can give some good advice. But yeah, no, I was very competitive through into my 20s. I still wanted to play professional golf. I came out to Wallace State in Alabama and had a short spell here in college, and it really wasn't for me. I came back, turned professional, did my traineeship at Knock Golf Club. Played a year on, used to be called the MasterCard Tour. It's just been disbanded, the Euro Pro Tour, which kind of for, an American audience would be more like a G Pro and playing in Monday qualifiers. That was really truthfully the sort of level. But interspersed with that, we had a very successful Pro-Am scene in Ireland. So as a club professional, you could go all around the island of Ireland and play in different Pro-Ams that were organised. And it was relatively lucrative if you could finish in the, let's say, top 5 or 6. You were certainly covered covering your expenses and putting some money in your pocket. So again, I think from a coaching perspective, having played a serious level of golf and had the experiences of a competitor, again, at least you're well versed in at least what it feels like. I mean, I remind Harris English and Brian Harman that I never played a Walker Cup, I never played in the U.S. Open, but at the same time, I can empathize and understand what the pressures feel like.
Mm-hmm. What was a bigger culture shock, Wallace State at Alabama, or when you moved to Dubai?
Wallace State. Well, at that point, I was fairly green. I was coming from from a fairly cosmopolitan, so to speak, easygoing environment in Belfast. We were just coming really out of the troubles. 94, we'd had a great kind of peace agreement. I can recall some really good weather those ensuing couple of summers. It was almost like, I'm not going to say like war has ended and things, but it just felt like there was a little bit of a brighter future going on in Northern Ireland. And when I hit the dry county of Coleman County, and
is it a dry county?
It was, yeah, it was really? Then. I mean, but
really,
it was a different deal. And again, could I have worked harder and really got my teeth into things and done a better job of it? Yes, of course I could. But yeah, I think Dubai, when I'd already kind of been out there, I'd already traveled a little bit, certainly around Europe, and so I kind of knew what I was kind of getting into when it came to Dubai.
Why did you go to Dubai?
September 2004, a client of mine that I was teaching was headed out there, and his cousin is Wayne Johnson, and Wayne remains a great friend of mine, who's the director of instruction at the Montgomery in Dubai. And this gentleman said to me, "Listen, do you want to come out, give me some golf lessons, golf instruction in the mornings, and then we'll go play golf?" So it was like a 5-day trip. So we flew out there, and I remember we stayed up in Jebel Ali, which is a little bit north of the city as it has grown, and I watched him hit some balls in the morning. We played the golf course. Then we went down and we played the Montgomery. We played Al Badia Golf Club, which is no longer a public course, although the Alpha Team family still own it, and they do have it as a golf course. We went to Dubai Creek, and I remember just thinking to myself, this place is unbelievable. It was very much American kind of operated. Troon Golf operated a lot of the facilities. I got to meet Wayne Johnson. Wayne had worked for Butch in Las Vegas. He'd opened a golf school for Butch with Claude Harmon, who, again, a great friend of mine. We eventually opened the Harmon School in Dubai. And, I remember meeting Wayne and just thinking to myself, look, there's so much I don't know about teaching golf. There's so much I don't know about the way it should be presented. There's so much I don't know about this whole operation. So having given it some thought that autumn, or fall, as you guys would say, I went out and I rented my apartment out. I went to the people who were, in charge of Blackwood Golf Centre. I said, look, can you give me until April? I'm going to go out and kind of try my luck in Dubai. And I flew out there it was either New Year's Eve or the day before. It was like very late 2004, and eventually got some work there closer to the summer. So I was there for a good sort of 6 months. Everyone got to know me as this kind of fairly, nice enough Irish guy who was hanging around looking for a job. But I was glad I did. I worked for Wayne at the Montgomery for 3 years. Ended up being director of instruction there. And again, as I say to a lot of younger people who ask me about that experience, like I went out there wanting to achieve something, got an opportunity, eventually having had to really like claw for it a little bit. And then that made me even hungrier to make sure I took advantage of it. So, I think that really helps you in your career if you go through an apprenticeship and you go through some struggles, and then you eventually, if you can carve out an opportunity for yourself, then you can really kind of take it to another level. So, eventually I became director of instruction at the Montgomery, and Claude and I opened the Harmon School in late 2008. So, it was a good run.
Yeah. Would you say, I mean, there's plenty of ways to make a really good career out of the industry that you're in. You don't have to teach, PGA Tour pros or major champions or any of that. Would you say that there was a lucky bounce here or there along the way that got you from just, a really great director of instruction at, whatever club it may be, to someone that's, really at the highest levels of the game now?
Yeah, I think timing, you've got to make some luck, but if if I was 5 years younger, I would have been approaching that idea of going to Dubai right when the first financial crisis was coming on. So there's just no way that they would have hired somebody like me from Ireland to, give us all of the different health insurances and different things we have to do. I think that had there not been, again, if I was 5 or 10 years younger, everybody has an understanding in our world of golf fitness. Everyone has an understanding of how the human body works, and how our people are certainly getting a wider acceptance of the fact that your body has a big impact on your golf swing. When we were certainly looking at the Titleist Performance Institute and the way that the body influences the golf swing, things like that, we were, really at the beginnings of that. And then, furthermore, another lucky break I had. I remember going to, I think we went out to Phoenix, and I did training with Phil Cheatham on 3D, and we went to Vegas, and a guy from, I think from Nevada, who was selling the TrackMan units at that point, these big old orange boxes. In those days they were very large. So again, having access to that technology really early. So you've got to have a bit of luck along the way. But as I say, I think if you have some sort of a vision and you're prepared to put yourself out there, Butch Harmon always said to me, you've got to be prepared to show up. You've got to be prepared to show up, whether you need to fly to Dubai to try something, or you go to some far-flung place that your instinct tells you to go to. I think putting yourself out there and trying to take a few risks is something that's that I certainly feel like I was fortunate to do.
Yeah. Present day. So I'm curious, your guys just get done with this brutal test at Oakmont. They still have to play, they play Hartford. Some of them might play Rocket Mortgage, but still very much in the American aerial game style currently. At what point do you and your players start to turn your attention to Open Championship golf, and what does that preparation generally look like?
I would say that it has been an attritional season. The guys have done very well. Oakmont, as you say, was very attritional. Quail Hollow was attritional. We had signature events pretty much on the back of major championships, which was difficult. So you've got to, in their own way, you have to make sure that they have the opportunity to rest and to recharge a little bit. Some of the guys will maybe want to go fishing and completely take their eyes off it for a few days. Other guys will just want to be kind of hanging out at home and going to the gym and things like that. I would turn their attention to it anytime, in the next sort of week or so. We've got some good wind here. I'll probably turn my attention to, and we have already, to some degree, certainly with Harris's preparation, worked hard on iron shots, not only for Scotland and Northern Ireland as it will be in the future, but really for his development as a player, to be able to control his spin and things a little bit better. But certainly any windy conditions here, we often go over to the Speedway green over in front of the lodge and start really having some long putts and getting used to.
This is the putting course at Sea Island.
Yes,
so almost like the Himalayas.
100%. So it's great for them to start to see that. We'll go out there maybe with a 5-iron from the edge of the green and just start to see the ball on the floor. I remember I was teaching a really good player. You guys may remember him, called Steve Webster, who's a fantastic player from England. And I remember saying to Stephen, how do you, because he was a great links player, he was good at both sort of elements. And he said, whenever I play Parkland golf, I'll look up, and whenever I play links golf, I start looking down onto the horizon. So just kind of getting them, acclimatized to that. As you say, the American game is a little bit different. But fortunately, certainly those two players have got great experience. Louis Oosthuizen, who I'll meet over there in Portrush as well, you would say has got fairly good experience at that type of golf. And one of the things I've been really enjoying this year, I've been helping some younger players, Blades Brown and Aldrich Potgieter, who's got good experience being an amateur champion, and Christo Lamprecht. I've been putting a little bit of energy into a sort of a subset of younger players, and I certainly think at this stage in my career, it's nice to take the historic nature of growing up where I've done, and then seeing how that preparation has been for good players and established players, and then being able to take the best and hopefully forget the worst that I've done in the past.
Yeah, I do find the visual very funny of a Sea Island resort guest here, going out on the putting green and seeing Harris English tooling around with a 5-iron there in preparation for Open Championship.
Well, I think that's one of the wonderful things. And I often, give golf lessons to guests here, and they say, I just saw Brian Harman out there practicing a little bit, and they take a moment just to, and another nice thing, which is kind of a little bit like Dubai here, that, the guys who are, let's say famous here, they don't really get bothered too much by people. People accept and understand that they're here, but, there's Brian Harman working on his wedge game, and they spend 5 minutes taking a look at what he's doing. And then you watch Keith Mitchell hitting a couple of drivers, and Harris English is in the gym every morning. And, it's kind of part of the fraternity here, which, is a lovely feeling for people to recognize that this is where they live and this is where they work. And it's also a wonderful resort and a great place to live.
Yes, it is. Very unique place. Is there anything, you mentioned working on iron play with Harris leading up to it. Is there anything usually technically that changes from playing the regular tour schedule going over there? Is it spin? That's aside from the short game. Is
spin
it
a little
spin,
bit? You'll find some changes in grind with wedges. Again, if we've had very firm conditions, you might find the bounce on the soles of the wedges getting nullified to some degree. It's really not going to be that impactful if the course conditions are very, very firm. Helping them understand what their tendencies are. When it gets windy and they get blown around a little bit, players maybe lean on their front leg a little more, or take the golf ball and move it back in their stance a little bit more, or alter their release patterns and hang onto the club. So, making sure that they recognize what the tendencies are. But, with the truth be told, I think, when we get over to Renaissance, there's and you've seen it, you've felt it. There's a different feel. The air back at home is different. The golf ball doesn't fly the same as it flies over here. Obviously, it's a lot cooler. The days are an awful lot longer. You're having to, adjust to big temperature changes, and the wind seems to affect the ball an awful lot more. So I think to some degree, until you get over there and start to get the ground underneath your feet. And Renaissance is a cool week for that. Again, the nights are so long. Some of the guys will go play North Berwick. Some of them might be fortunate enough to go and play Muirfield. Renaissance gives them a good test and certainly lets you feel those conditions. And then by the time that tournament draws to a conclusion, we'll have a reasonably long runway, and it'll be, I think it'll be nicer. I've felt like we went to Augusta on Saturday night this year, working Sunday. We flew up to Oakmont Sunday, and those major weeks can end up being really, really long. And I think that in some ways it's nicer to have an actual event prior on similar conditions when the conditions are changing an awful lot. So I think it'll be nice for them to get a Portrush on Sunday night or Monday, and we'll get cracking. You
mentioned attrition, the word attrition with the current season. Where do you see that show up? Is it mentally or is it physically?
I think it's both. I mean, I think the weeks, I stayed with Harris English in a little place in Memorial, and we got in there pretty early, working Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, went out to the course with him Thursday, walked the golf course Thursday, flew home Thursday, and I'm thinking he's got to be here for another 3 days. I mean, it's a full and long week that they spend out there. Physically, if things are going pretty well, they're going to play at least 9 holes Tuesday, Wednesday, and in a signature event, 72 holes Thursday to Sunday. If things aren't going too good, they might start practicing a little bit more, and then that's going to provide a wear and tear on the body. And then from a mental standpoint, Harris said to me at Memorial, JP, I'm just trying to figure out where to miss it. And I said, Harris, there's nowhere to miss it. At the end of the day, you've got to hit the shot. And if you don't execute the shot, you've got to be prepared. You're going to pitch it out of the rough, or you're going to have to chip it to 20 feet, and there is no miss. So, mentally that takes a toll, because when you think of, like Scotty Scheffler talked about a little bit with the mud ball that was evident there at, I think it was Oakmont, wasn't it? Mm-hmm. It's like they prepare to be able to execute, and they prepare to be able to navigate. And then you take that ability to navigate away from them and the ability to execute away from them, and that becomes very stressful for them. So there's definitely mental and physical attrition, and it's we've all played golf. It's a stressful endeavor. Doesn't matter how good you are, you don't really know what's going to come next, and that's that's a tough deal. And I think that our sport is in a situation where as we as we progress, we are seeing that it's having a big impact on them physically. It's having a big impact on them mentally. And I think a slightly shorter season and a little bit of an ability to recharge and reset will certainly be good for the athletes.
Yeah, that's interesting. I did notice that everyone seemed a little cranky at Oakmont. They say everyone seemed a little tired. The interviews are, that you can sense the tone changing. Obviously, I think that has to do a lot with probably the golf course they were playing being so frustrating. Yeah. As you said, though, there has to be a skill, especially when you go play links golf, which is adapting to changing conditions, right?
100%.
Like the Oakmont thing really showed, I think, that the guys that can adjust to, water on the fairways or, tapping more into creativity rather than so much of what they've practiced really came to light. I mean, you have 2 Open champions in your stable.
Yep.
Louis, I don't know. Were you working with Louis at the time?
I was not. No. Louis was. We met in Dubai. He came over and I think he had an ankle injury at one point, and he came and he did a little bit of rehab in Dubai, and then he hit some balls with us. And I remember watching him prior to that when he just really turned professional, and watched this, little whippersnapper of a lad coming in from South Africa. He just had the most beautiful golf swing, and he hit the ball so far. Mm-hmm. So that would have been about 2009, 2010 sort of seeing him, and then he was with us a little after he was an Open champion. But Louis' career is he's I think he's 42, maybe coming 43, or 41 coming 42, and he's on the back end of his career, and he's got a lot of family commitments. He's a beautiful farm now out in Ocala, and he's he loves being out there. He loves doing his thing, and he works hard out there. And when he gets into tournament mode, he continues to work hard. And to your point about the adaptability and the understanding of conditions and an ability to create a strategy, but also respond to what's going on environmentally. I think that's one of the things that I've noticed working for Louis over the years. It's probably the most underrated part of his skill set. Like, he will go to a golf tournament and he will say, I am going to do this week. We went to Harding Park and he got a 9-wood because he realized that he could get it. If he got it in the rough, he could get it out of the rough and get it somewhere around about the front of the green, whereas other guys are having to pitch out because you really couldn't get a 4 or 5 iron through the rough. Mm-hmm. So he's very, very innovative, very strategic, and has that incredible ability to adapt. And obviously does it with this beautiful, graceful golf swing that we all love, that I wish I had more in the creation of, but I'm really only just taking care of it the odd time.
Yeah, you babysit the move. But one guy that does strike me as somebody that really doesn't care what the conditions call for is Brian Harman. Mm-hmm. I'm curious, 2 years ago, was there anything leading up to that week where you said this guy could win by 6 shots, as he did?
He looked really good in Hartford. That was, I was up in Hartford, and he worked on, we call it his little kind of like shoulder to shoulder shot, which he's really put in as part of something. And I remember he texted me, I think he finished 2nd or 3rd in Hartford, and he said, that little shot made me 6 or 7 birdies over the weekend, which for a golf coach, that's one of the biggest compliments you can have, if you feel like you've been directly indicated as to being responsible for an assistance in the actual performance. So that was really cool. We got to Renaissance. He looked really at ease with things. He was swinging the golf club really well. He'd done some really good specific kind of training, which we've kind of started that process again. Because again, he's not a young player anymore. He's 37 years old, and sometimes, when he takes a little bit of time away, his legs, his lower body gets a little bit more sluggish and things. So we just got to, keep arming him with the information as to what he needs to do to be able to get prepared. And I do remember by the time we got to Liverpool, I remember going out on the Tuesday, and it was horrendous out there. It was, nobody really wanted to be out. It was windy, it was raining, it was misty, it was cold. And he played 18 holes in those conditions, and I kind of walked with him. We got absolutely soaked. He was wearing 2 rain gloves, and he said, well, I may as well get out here because no one else is going to do it. It might be like this. So he had that really nice kind of accepting attitude that week. And, I think with Brian's very intelligent, and he is very thoughtful. And sometimes he will there's nothing in his way, he can sort of sometimes think problems into fruition. So I think when conditions are difficult, his brain is so caught up in the wind's going to do this. I need to pitch it here. That's not going to be where I want to go over there. I need to get it into this area. I need to get this rain glove. I need to dry this, that, there's so many things going on that then he can just fire up with his true ability. So I think those tough conditions we saw in Valero this year and obviously in Hoylake a couple of years ago, they can sometimes play to his advantage.
Yeah. It's amazing. I actually stepped on his foot accidentally at the PGA show 2 years ago, which is the first time I had seen him. He was carrying the trophy and I backed, at the Hyatt bar down there, it gets a little crowded.
Right.
And I turned around to look who it was and looked down and it was Brian Harman. Yeah. And it's shocking, 37 years old. And for someone with his size to be able to compete. Yeah. So what does he do? I guess how much better does he have to be at, every part of the game to make up for some of these things?
That's a very good question. I think the cool thing that we've seen when Jack Lumpkin and I and we're here in the Lumpkin Library, which is fantastic, and we got Jack's memorabilia on the wall. And as Jack got into his 80s and wasn't able to travel and do just as much with Brian, we really got Brian to a point where we realized where the ceiling really was. Like, got his ball striking to a point where not only was he a really good driver of the golf ball, very, very straight, reasonably long for his size, we got to a point where his iron play was consistently gaining strokes on the field, became a much better wedge player, certainly became a much more neutral type of iron player, able to access more flags and things like that. But to your point, Brian's 100% can be a top, let's say a top 10 player with his 100%. If he drops down to 90% and some of that ball striking just gets a little bit off, where some of the bigger, stronger players are still putting the golf ball in position far enough down the fairway, Brian's 90% becomes really difficult to work with. And although he's got that incredible short game, an elite level putter, it becomes just harder to compete at that top 10 kind of level. So his responsibility is to continue to maintain his body as an athlete, do the stuff in his golf swing that he's been doing, and try and reach that 100% place 4, 5, 6 times a year. And we see that when he does that, he can be one of the best players in the world. And it is a frustration because you see, a big guy like Scotty Scheffler who reaches that 100% level much, much more frequently than anybody else. But when he does dip a little bit and starts to miscue things a little bit, he can still kind of be competitive because his 176 ball speed goes to 171 rather than his 169 dipping down to 162 or 163 and all. So thrilled with what Brian has done. I think he's probably achieved what he probably should have achieved in his career up to this point, and hopefully we can continue to pave some more things out in the future. But Walker Cup player a couple of times.
Yeah, amazing resume.
And as you say, he does it with a frame and a stature that, you sometimes think Randy Myers, and I joke sometimes, like if Brian was Dustin Johnson's size, no one would touch him. And I think there's an element of truth in that.
Absolutely. One thing I skipped over, but I want to ask for the amateur golfers out there is I hear a lot of times when they go across the pond to play in Scotland, Ireland, UK, they come back with bad habits, right, in their game. They say, and it might not be bad habits, it's just sort of crept into what they usually do. Yeah. So they try to push the ball way far back, playing in gusty conditions, or that lead side sort of sags into the ball, gets ahead of it, right? And we've changed the low point. Is that something that pros also have to monitor 100%. When they come back from 2 weeks over there?
Yep, 100%. You'll even see little things like pitching styles might change a little bit. They'll maybe go down and we'll maybe not get into the whole steep, shallow pitching and chipping debate.
I would love to. How much time do we have?
They'll maybe go down and get it a little bit more from links turf. They'll want to flight things in lower. They'll start maybe getting used to different styles of chip shots and pitch shots. So you need to just gently kind of reset that a little bit. And to some degree, if we played if we played every week on links golf courses, I think some of the equipment would be a little bit different. I think some of the styles would be a little bit different. And I'm kind of looking forward to Portrush, to seeing it. I played there. I think it was last summer I played there, and they've done a fantastic job with a couple of the new holes that they put in there, and it's always going to be a really cool test. But to your point, monitoring some of those tendencies, looking at how equipment can benefit you in links conditions, and then possibly how it won't benefit you when you come back and you end up playing in Memphis. Those are things we've got to keep looking at.
Yeah. What areas of the game do you think Portrush tests for the pros the most? Is there a specific style of player that it might benefit? I mean, Shane Lowry does everything well. Right. So that would be an easy answer.
Yeah, I think it does give you some options off the tee, but there are certain places that you've got to avoid in Portrush. Some of the deep bunkers off the tee you've got to avoid. The greens don't play very big. I was thinking about this, just thinking about some of the questions you might ask, and I can't think that the greens would be specifically very small, but they don't play that big. There's a lot of little shelves that you've got to find, again, guarded by a lot of bunkers and little runoff areas and things like that. So controlling the ball into the greens would be good. And then going back to to what you talked about, like with a lot of links courses, having that ability to be adaptable and to manage a 7 o'clock in the morning draw where it's cold and windy, and you've got to get through to 10:30 and the sun comes out, and the last 5 or 6 holes are pretty benign. So being able to kind of just hang in there and embrace the Open Championship for what it is. It's Tom Watson played in 40, and he said he could only have won about 18 of them, but the draw just didn't allow him to get himself in a position. So understanding that that's going to be part of it, and you kind of put your best foot forward and see what you can make of it.
So toughness and all of that is as important, you think, going into a tournament then?
I think so.
The technical
stuff. And I remember walking down the hill. My brother lives in Portrush, and he's not a golfer, he's a surfer. We got some really good surf in Portrush and up around the coast and into Donegal. I'm walking down to watch Darren Clarke tee off. I'd worked with Darren for a couple of years in Dubai, and it was 5:15 in the morning. I think Clarkey had like a 6:12 or something like this. I'm walking down the hill, and there were people everywhere. The grandstand was rammed with people. And I remember Darren walking out onto the thing and looking at him, and he couldn't believe, this place was rammed. And of course, Clarkey hit it down the right and knocked it on the green and holed the putt for a 3, which was a lot of fun. But there's going to be, you can get overawed by it as well. So it's and we saw Rory the last time, getting slightly out of his rhythm and having a really poor score on the first day. So the Open Championship, I still think it's the biggest tournament in the world. And it's very special for them whenever they go over there. And I certainly I always think about Brian saying he'll never get tired of signing those open flags.
Yeah. Do you have any pub recommendations for this that might be there for the event? Yeah,
the Harbour Bar up there is really good. The Harbour Bar is it's kind of legendary. They do serve really good Guinness in there. The Guinness has gotten better over the years, and some of the tin stuff is okay in America.
How does that work? How does it get better?
I don't really know. They say there are kegs of Guinness that don't leave the island of Ireland. I don't know whether that's true or not. Mm-hmm. They also say there are ways of the beer, the stout, going from the keg to the pump, and they will respect that sort of the tradition of it not going very far before it comes out. They say Guinness doesn't travel well. That's one of those little things. But the Harbour Bar would be somewhere I would definitely recommend. And all around that little harbour area there is fantastic. And I'm lucky enough still to know a couple of people there, made a couple of restaurant reservations already. So I'll look forward to taking some of the Americans down there and showing them what's what.
I'll be in there then. I'll see you there.
I like it.
I do. The can has gotten, I feel like, better, in the last 10 years or so.
Yeah, going back to my father's work, whenever he first became the managing director of that oyster farm was owned by Guinness.
Okay.
And he used to go to Dublin to these meetings where, it was a big old boardroom like this, and he would do a presentation. He used to say he would look around and there were a couple of these 90-year-olds falling asleep in their chairs and things like that. But Diageo is a big company, and they've figured out how to make the likes of that widget that they put in the can and things work. So yeah, they've done a decent job with that.
Absolutely. The last time I was here at Sea Island, I got to spend some time with you on the range, and you said one of my favorite quotes I've ever heard from a coach, which is that your policy is that you're not technical after lunchtime on Tuesdays. Mm-hmm. Is that right? Do I have that right?
If I can absolutely avoid doing that, I'm never going to try and I'm never going to say anything that would start a player thinking about technique unless I can avoid it. I don't want to. I mean, I haven't played the game. I think if you can be out there trying to play this sport with the feel of swinging the golf club as opposed to too many internal thoughts about, the way your right elbow is going to fold or whatever. Whilst those things are very important to being able to perform better, they should be done at a time and a place which is away from the performance state. So I've kind of felt like, because Wednesdays are a nightmare. So if you start on a Tuesday and you start introducing things, you're probably still going to be thinking about it and working on it with them on a Wednesday. And then if Wednesday doesn't go well and they're unsure, then we've got the performance is right around the corner. So if we can get to a point by Tuesday at lunch where all of that's done and we've created some good feels, that's what we're going to stick to. That would be my preferred way of doing it.
Has there ever been a scenario in which Tuesday comes around afternoon and a player doesn't have it, right? It's very clearly they don't have it, and something clicks before Thursday.
Yeah, and often, yes, it does. It happens quite frequently, and hopefully the guys that I help will recognize that if we're at that point on a Tuesday afternoon or a Wednesday morning, we're trying to create a shot, trying to create something they're comfortable with. Mm-hmm. Can we hit a low cut? Can we get it into play? And can we get this tournament started and get you comfortable with what you're doing as opposed to too many? So, and listen, there are so many different players and so many different ways to do it. I mean, I think that I try and create an environment where the players that I help probably steer away from those sorts of things. I watched Justin Rose going through his paces, fabulous player, still having great success. And he seems to be able to work hard technically on a Wednesday or even on a Thursday before he goes and plays and then goes to play golf. And I really admire that. I find that that's something that if I was doing that with a lot of the golfers that I was training, I feel like I would be putting them in an awkward position. And perhaps if somebody who's really technically minded comes along who needs that, then as a coach, then you have to adapt and be able to give them what they need, and that's part and parcel of it. But being from my background with Brian or with Butch and with Claude, and I always think of Butch's dad saying, "If you're not working on something you can use on a back nine on a Sunday, you're wasting your time," which is one of his old quotes.
Yeah. So much of it, about tournament golf is getting, as you said, getting into the tournament, right? Because if you can just get yourself settled and maybe hit a couple good ones and make an early birdie, then it can change. You can flip into a mode in which, those feels start to seem normal. I think
as well, with a lot of really good ones, is getting into like a pattern. And that pattern may be the most technically, scientifically correct thing that you could do, or it could be something that, I've had guys going, well, I strengthened my grip and tried to keep the face looking at the ball on the way back, and they, nearly won a golf tournament. So if you can get into a playable pattern, and hopefully that doesn't deviate miles away from the theme that you're working on,
right?
Then you're in a situation where, again, it's theirs. They can go play, and they have to own those things. You can't, like as a coach or a swing teacher, it's like, I never try and tell them what to feel. I ask them what they feel when they do it right, and then remind them of what their feelings are, because it's the game. The game belongs to them. We don't hit the shots. I remember being at dinner with Rory one night in Dubai, and we're having a conversation about golf, and just kind of like you and I are. And I remember saying to him, Butch has won 18 major championships with the players, and Rory just looked at me and went, "How many shots has he hit?" And I went, fair enough. Yeah. And those are, I'm a big fan of Rory. I'm a big fan of Butch. He's one of my great friends and mentors out with what I've done. But it made me kind of think about it. We got to remember your place in this whole thing.
Yes. Yeah. You've been, So I've been in in the game for maybe 15 years now, taking lessons, playing competitively, all that, and I'm shocked at how different the information is these days compared to what was being taught even 15 years ago. And you could say the same about 10. You could say the same about 5. And you are really at the ground floor of a lot of this. As you said, you're obsessed. So as soon as new information and ideas pop up, and it really, I guess a better way of saying that is it's an idea business, right? People have ideas, they test these theories, and they populate their way into the mainstream. What would you say is the in vogue thing right now that people are focusing on? And to give you an example, this has gone from, it could be a move, like the hands in, club head outside takeaway, or the swing left pattern, or it could be, a metric like spin loft, apex, distance. What is the thing right now that people are discussing and thinking about at the highest levels?
I think probably the ability to change kinematic sequencing, so to change athletic sequencing using force plate and ground force information, I think is probably is probably one of the ways that we're starting to be able to stimulate really good alterations with players, whether that be a pattern. For example, if we're looking at horizontal pressure, if somebody's not pushing enough pressure horizontally from the trail leg to the lead leg, that's going to probably or potentially result in a steepening of the shaft in transition. If there's too much torque and there's too much vertical, there won't be enough shaft. So you can begin to manipulate, might be the right word, the sequencing that a player is experiencing, which is going to have a knock-on effect to how the golf club's moving, which would be to some degree, and the way that I would look at that, it would be the ability to transfer the knowledge that you would have from 3D to something very trainable, which would have a knock-on effect. Now, and that's not to say that, if this particular person was unable to load their trail side or something like that, not thinking of anyone in particular, that wouldn't be something you would have to go to first. But from a training and instructional perspective, being able to kind of navigate that landscape of the sequencing needs to be correct. We can just about see what the sequencing is through force plates and through how they're using the floor. And then can we start to just gently improve the way they're using the floor, which is going to tidy up the sequencing, which would then and groove a better pattern.
This is a kind of, one of the big differences I can see, right? So there was, and again, the sample size that I'm referring to is quite small. It's YouTube and the handful of coaches I had lessons with. But a lot of the discussion was about you put the club here and then you put the club here, hand path, plane, all of this stuff. Whereas now I see the information being, this is the way the body moves. And if you can get the body to move in the proper ways, and then the club will react this way. Is that fair?
That is very fair. And it's like, we always then have to kind of counter that. And most of what we do, it's almost like some time of kind of contradictory stuff. But like, if you put the golf club in the right place, will your body organize itself to be able to generate the club being in the right place? So yes, I think the blueprint would be the posture, the correct posture, the ability to move properly, and then an understanding of correct movement. And then you want to counter that with, and the golf club, as you're doing that, should be moving through these areas, let's say. But certainly, I think that we are at a point now where the body motion and the pressure that's moving through the floor can help us to predetermine what's probably going to be happening with the golf club. And I've kind of enjoyed that. I've definitely changed a little bit, changed the way I do some things in order to like accommodate that. And I've seen what I would refer to as some quite authentic not changes, like improvements, when somebody understands, okay, so that's what I'm supposed to be doing, and that's going to make that do that, and then okay, I can do that. And that's quite exciting to me. And I think the next little part is, being able to start to kind of look at your video, translate it into some sort of 3D component, and being able to kind of monitor what's going on with AI and or some programs that exist. And I'm looking at that just to see how effective that would be.
Yeah,
because it's all about performance, and it's all about them playing better and hitting better shots and scoring lower. That's really what it should be about.
Yeah, so technology is affecting this a lot. I know you don't want to get involved in the current religious short game war that's unfolding before us, but when did people start hitting draw bunker shots and draw pitches?
Pete Cowan would have been the first one that I did that with, and that would have been through the mid 2005, 6, 7 in Dubai. I used to go into some seminars with Pete, and Pete's stuff's fantastic. And one of the things I love about Pete's short game work is that he will make the golf swing happen from the lie and the situation. So the lie and the situation is first, and the way that the player would then organize themselves in order to play the shot is second. And to some degree, what we're seeing with this little short game war that we're having is we're not really talking about the lie in the situation. We're just talking about the technique,
right?
And therefore, we're going to reach an impasse every single time, because if you want something really, really soft with low ball speed and a lot of float, you can't lean the shaft and have the club descending hard on the ball. But at the same time, if you want to guarantee a really good strike and you don't have to get float and you don't have to let the ball come off really soft, it's probably a nice way to be able to guarantee or generate a good strike. So I think what we have to try to do is be a little bit more mindful of the fact that when we're playing golf, the situation we have in front of us requires us to be able to adapt. And some of those adaptations may be really advanced and difficult, and some of them might allow us to be quite simple and guarantee good contact. And the best in the world seem to be able to go in both directions.
Yeah. Well, I think if we could do a part 2 on this after at a certain date, that would be great, because there's a lot to unpack there, and I'm not qualified or prepared to go into it today.
I don't know that I am either. Casey, but anyway,
I want to ask you about 2 more players before we talk about your current role here. You mentioned them earlier. You have 2 very, very exciting young players in Blades Brown and Aldrich Podgieter.
Very well pronounced.
Thank you. I practiced last night. Why are these young kids so much more prepared, it seems, to compete today? Is that a recency bias, that because we have the Luke Clantons of the world and Nick Dunlap won, or is that fair to say that these younger kids are more prepared to compete?
I think they're better at golf at a younger age. I think they are better. They're better coached. The information's better. I would say that the parents and the club influences from a less, let's say, elite coaching package level. I think the general information that they get is an awful lot better. I think that then that acceleration of, how good can this young person be at 14, 15, 16, coupled with, okay, I see Rory in the gym. I see Scotty Scheffler doing his Golf Forever program. So then they're starting to do that sort of training. I think launch monitors have helped an awful lot. They can keep the parameters an awful lot narrower. I would say that Blades is a really good example of that. Somebody who's gotten to 17, 18 years old and decided that college isn't something he necessarily needs to do. And I think as the career shortens, again, if we have these prolonged seasons of mental and physical attrition, we are going to see players who maybe come out at 18, 19 years old and they may finish at 31, 32, similar to what a soccer player would do or a basketball player would do. I don't think we're going to see the same lengthy careers like a Bernhard Langer, who came out at 18, 19 and he's still playing a really high level of golf almost into his 70s. And I think that's something that this next these commissioners and live people and RNA and USGA people, I think they have to navigate that. I mean, our sport has become an awful lot more athletic. Aldrich is living proof of just how athletic and how powerful our sport is. But I think he's a little bit more of an authentic one. I think he's been well trained, but there's a certain rawness to what he's doing that that is kind of evident in some of the constraints that he has when he plays, his distance control and things like that, which we're working on. And I think as well, we're reaching this point in 2025 where we're starting to see, look, if this young man has a 200 miles an hour ball speed, that's great, but how do you caddy for that? So what does he do when he's got a 7-iron into a little wind from 178, or a shot from 178 into a little wind, and all of a sudden his gapping between clubs is 26 yards and he's right on that 13-yard window. So we've looked at potentially 184 to 186 being a nice like upper end window of ball speed for a really competitive player. And I'm sure in baseball, I don't know, but I'm sure there are pitchers who can pitch it at whatever 199, but they're not as effective because they don't have that versatility and the adaptability to be able to.
You're talking about slowing it down 15 miles an hour?
And I'm not talking about slowing it down. I'm talking about if you have 200,
right,
and you want to be competitive, you're going to find that there are holes in your game below that 200.
Gotcha.
That are at a point where you're going to say to yourself, I don't need 200. And I'm not, so he may well still be able to go and get 200 when he wants it, but his actual cruising speed might be 185 or 188 or something like that. And and Aldrich's definitely at that point where he'll cruise at 192 to 194 ball speed he can carry. We talked last night on the phone. He's up in Detroit, and he said there are a lot of bunkers at 299 meters. He said if I have a little wind behind, or if I have a little wind off the right, I'll cover those. So it's a 335 yard cover that he's looking at. But again, talking to his caddy and things like that, and the guys at Titleist who have been, fantastic so far, trying to get his equipment to a point where it's matching as best we can the gapping and looking at different golf balls to help with his spin and things like that. The hard thing for him is, when he's got 160 meters, which what are we, a 176? He's probably still on a 9-iron at 176. So what are you doing at 154? And we got to recognize that when you're playing professional golf, 154 is where you start to make money. You know what I mean? It doesn't matter so much whether it's 148 or 164. So there's your 200 mile an hour back to 190. But being able to control the golf ball from the fairway is really where the money's going to be at. When we look at people like a Lucas Glover, who is probably like a 168 guy now, but he controls the golf ball as well as anybody, and he's having a really nice kind of Indian summer in his career. So I do think things are changing a little bit. I rambled on about your question. I think these younger players coming in, my hope is that we can make sure that to some degree they're protected when they go through the inevitable kind of like plunge of the wave that we see in golf, which is just natural. Nick Dunlap's going through that right now, which is hard for him, and it's very, very public, and it's very embarrassing when you go through that. Gordon Sargent hopefully has almost done that. Hopefully the end of his Vanderbilt career was the edge of that, and both of those guys are getting some really good swing advice, which they clearly need. But it's hard to do that when you're young. It's hard to do that when you're Harris English. When he went through that, when he was a fairly wealthy, well-established tour player in his late 20s, early 30s, it was hard for him to go. It was hard for Lee Westwood to go through that. So I just hope that these kids who are coming through a world of smartphones and high anxiety and things like that, when they do go through that, we're helping to protect them and make sure that they recognize that this isn't the be-all and end-all, and they've obviously been gifted a great deal of ability.
Do you think that phase is inevitable for most players, that they will go through that?
Yeah. There's not a player, when you look at, if you ever, look at data golf and look at players' careers, even long careers, Adam Scott's career, there's always these little waves that they go through. And that could be, in Scotty's case, problems with the putter, or in Tiger's case, could be an injury, or it could be, some problems in your personal life or things like that. Those little waves are kind of inevitable as you go through your career. And I just think with the younger players coming out, get out on the PGA Tour, and all of a sudden the fairways are a little narrower and the greens are a little firmer and the hole locations are a little tighter, and then all of a sudden it's not quite going where I'm looking anymore, and then there's people everywhere and people are asking me why it's not going well, and people are calling me, and there's a lot of added pressure that goes on there. So my own feel would be potentially the Corn Ferry Tour being a real breeding ground for those guys able to cut their teeth. I think there'd be an argument for nobody over the age of 40 playing on the Corn Ferry Tour. I think there's also an argument for the Seniors Tour to come back, the Champions Tour to come back to 45, and I think that would balance the whole thing up a little bit better. The hard thing about that is we still see guys like Stuart Sink, and we still see kids coming in like Nick did and winning golf tournaments. So, we want to make sure we don't level it too hard.
Yeah. I find it very interesting that you think careers won't be as long as they were. I guess everything you said makes complete sense to me. When I think of somebody with 200 miles an hour ball speed at 20, my mind goes to, okay, you just stretch that out, and it almost like the Phil argument. Everyone's saying, well, this is, the backswing is so long. As he tightens up as he gets older, he's going to be still at parallel, and he can play longer and longer. And Bernhard's played a ton of golf in his life,
huge amount of golf,
right? Yeah. But I guess what you're saying is that it's a different. Is it different style of golf? Is it a different level of athleticism? And
100%.
Yeah.
You watch Bernhard. Bernhard Langer's a fabulous player, and I've learned a great deal from him and admired him throughout my life. But Bernhard never hit it hard.
Yeah.
He was a precision player, and if you start putting those sorts of torques and those sorts of forces onto the human body, it's likely that we can continue to develop training systems and nutritional systems and periodized rest, periods of rest where players can reassimilate and rebalance themselves and things like that. But the way we're kind of going at the moment, or the way we were going, where it was like, balls to the wall, let's hit it as far as we can.
Yeah. Coming
out of college, all these kids are hitting it so far. Like there's a little bit of a recipe for losing some control of your equipment, losing some control of your approach shots, and potentially then you losing some control of your mental faculties.
Yeah. And the physical. So this is not exclusive to golf. We just, why have 3 of the NBA's, best talents tore their Achilles in the last month or so? Like, this is a very interesting, as more resources and information and better care and private jets and all these things come, why are more injuries happening? All right, so Northern Ireland, Dubai, Alabama, I'm sure a lot of other places.
A few other places.
In between. And then you come here to Sea Island, one of my favorite places on earth. What's your pitch to people who have not come to Sea Island or St. Simon's before?
When you drive over that causeway over there, you kind of you breathe a sigh of relief. There's a beautiful sort of calmness to it. There's an old style of hospitality here, and a tradition that's, I don't know that I've found many instances like that in the United States. From the bagpiper who takes a lap around the resort here in the evenings to the way people are served with drinks and dinner and the various parts of the resort.
The cookies that you can choose to be delivered to your room.
And I think the variance that we have here now with the offerings at the lodge and the offerings at the inn, or going over to the cloister, and so you can experience that on some different levels. But I think the true experience goes back to likes what we were saying about Brian Harman and these guys. It's like it's a place where everybody kind of breathes a sigh of relief. Everybody seems to enjoy the beautiful settings combined with the nature and the views and the hospitality and the tradition. Couple that with the unbelievable facilities they've given us here at the Golf Performance Center. You guys have seen those, and the 3 fabulous golf courses that we have here. I don't think there are many places like it, and it's it's somewhere that I've become very proud to call home. My kids are growing up here. they seem to be developing South Georgia accents, which
oh no, how do you feel about this?
I need to get them back to Belfast for a couple of weeks and see if we can just get a little twang out of them again.
Belfast with the southern drawl would be quite interesting.
It's going to work somewhere.
Yeah.
But no, a fantastic place. It's, for me as well, knowing that, that they're here whenever I'm away traveling. It's a really nice life for young people to have right here. And maybe for older people, you were saying you might like to retire here.
I would, yes.
In a good few years' time. But, very, very special. And, some of the people, again, that I've met here, I've become friendly with Davis Love III, who's become I hesitate to say I teach Davis Love III. Like, Davis teaches me more than I ever teach him. I can keep an eye on his golf swing for him. And Brian and Harris and the amazing staff here at Sea Island as well. So we're very fortunate here, and we always look forward. It's funny, I took my family out and we had a little sort of a family loop at Seaside the other night, and I was coming up the last hole and I said to my wife, this is where the hospitality is for the RSM. We're standing on the 18th green, and she's looking around going, no, I can't believe that they do. She just couldn't get her bearings with the production of it all. Yeah. And that always certainly rounds off a fantastic year for us when the RSM comes around, and that would be one I would love to get one of the boys to go really well. I think I've had a top 6 or something like that in the RSM, but we haven't knocked that one off yet. Yeah.
They need the Nick Taylor treatment in Canada. That's like one of these bags on the wall needs to win it.
Yeah, well, hopefully I don't get rugby tackled whenever I go in Harrison.
What? How does? So I'm not saying this because I'm here or enjoy your company. Sea Island, really, when I think about if you want to go to a place in the United States to get better, if you want the best information out there or fittings, just instruction in general, it's become synonymous in my brain. I was in college before I went in my senior year, just in the wilderness with the putter, and I came up here to see Mike Shannon, who's no longer here, but there was yourself, and there was just.
And Mike's legacy really has lived on, in terms of Phil Kenyon taking over.
Phil's
that position,
here now. Yep.
David Angelotti, the putting studio that we have, and I think to your point, I think when you come in here, whether you're an aspiring beginner golfer or an established player who's a 15 handicapper, or a good player or a tour player or a college player, you're going to be able to have an experience that is similar to what one of the best players in the world would receive. And I think that's one thing we really try and pride ourselves on, having access to golf fitness professionals who can help you understand your body. And that's not to say that you need to be someone who's going to come and be in the gym like Harris English is every morning. But if you've got a chronic slice and you've got something really wrong with your trail shoulder, and Randy and Tom can help you with that, and then you can understand how that's affecting your golf swing. Or your teaching professional, your coach can then start to say, okay, he's got this impingement, and then we can work around that. Or if you need, to your point, a new putter, something fresh, a different approach to green reading, or if you haven't updated your golf equipment for a long time. I mean, they've got one of the greatest club fitting. It was interesting thinking when we were chatting about the Dubai thing, that was something we really never did a thorough job of in Dubai. And I guess some of the constraints of getting merchandise and things there. And I know they've made some updates since I left there, but Craig and his team here from a club fitting perspective, they're brand agnostic. They've got every manner of pieces of equipment down there that you can think of. At one point, I saw that we have 7 TrackMen, which I don't even know whether TrackMen is the plural or not, but they've got a lot of TrackMen. We've got a lot of units down there, watching a lot of guests and clients hitting golf shots, and those guys are from fitting wedges to the latest driver to even just giving people really impartial, good information. I think there's a trust, it seems, in America with what they've experienced with Sea Island, and hopefully I'm a part of that, and people come here to get a little bit better at golf, and they come here to have a good experience along the way, and the views aren't bad either.
Yes, it's hard to be super relaxed as the wind is off your left on the range, and you have an into the grain lie with a wedge, and but somehow it is, you know. But no, it is. If it, it has the highest quality of information and tools and resources here, coupled with that amazing kind of slow Southern lifestyle, which is a great fit, and we enjoy very much.
Cool.
Yeah. Well, thank you, Mr. Parsons, for the time.
Thank you, Casey.
Happy anniversary.
Thank you very much.
Good luck Good luck
And
overseas.
maybe I'll see you in Portrush.
I will see you
I'll
at the
buy you a pint
Harbor
from the
Bar.
Harbor
I wrote
Bar.
it down here.
Beautiful.
Harbor Bar.
Thank you
sir.
very much.
Thanks for listening, everyone. And if you enjoyed this episode, we strongly encourage you to become a member of the Golfer's Journal, or if you already are, to share it with your friends. As a reader-supported publication, we couldn't do it without you. We also couldn't do it without the help of our partners, and they are Titleist, Scotty Cameron, FootJoy, Holderness & Bourne, Omega, Charles Schwab, and BMW. We'll see you next time on the Golfer's Journal podcast.